We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Wednesday night, December 4th, 2024, as we record this new episode. This show is our winter meetings preview episode. We've seen some activity around Major League Baseball. Mid-tier starting pitchers have signed, which we'll discuss just how crazy expensive starting pitching has become in Major League Baseball. But rumors are aplenty. The RFP process that I talked about in our previous episode regarding Juan Soto, well, it continues to be an RFP process because they have reached the next stage. The San Francisco Giants are hot for Corbin Burnes. And could we get a Harvard-Westlake reunion in Boston with Max Fried possibly joining high school buddy Lucas Giolito? Lots of speculation and gossip in these next few days. So let's chat about it, as we even have our own exciting news when it comes to the winter meetings. Joining me are Sox Machine beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis. And hello, James and Jim. And that exciting news is all of us, all three, are going to be in Dallas, Texas for the winter meetings. Major League Baseball was kind enough to, we wanted to make sure James was credentialed because we needed James to be there. But all three of us have been there, so we're going to be able to do a lot more on the content side than we were able to do last year in Jim's backyard in Nashville. So I'm really excited about this possibility, Jim. What could our readers and listeners expect next week when we are in Dallas?
Well, the hope is that the White Sox will make some news, but we can't really be in control of that. We are when it comes to what we control our destiny in. It's going to be probably independent of what the White Sox are doing. One, you have the Hall of Fame votes for the Veterans Committee on Sunday, so we'll find out if a few people with White Sox ties make it. That's number one. So it's bookended by that, and then by the Rule 5 draft on Wednesday. So we do have a couple of news pillars involving the White Sox that, you know, regardless of whether the vote shakes out in their favor, like, you know, we'll be on the ground for those. In between, at the very least, we'll be able to drop in on press conferences, whether it's White Sox press conferences, whether it's tangential to the White Sox, finding out more about Will Venable, finding more about Walker McKinnon. Maybe James will sneak in a question nobody cares about with Scott Boras, except White Sox fans, and he'll get an answer about Noah Schultz or something like that to get White Sox fans all fired up and have John Greenberg make fun of him. Have a lot of possibilities without the White Sox doing anything, but based on scuttlebutt. It seems like Juan Soto should be off the board. Jeff Passan said that he's expecting a Juan Soto decision before the winter meetings. So perhaps that creates some activity for all of the undercard decisions being made, free agents, trades, etc. So yeah, we should be on hand for a lot. It almost seems like the way pitchers are flying off the board seems like a correction from last year. Almost seems like if Rob Manfred wanted to make the winter meetings a marquee event again, where things actually happen versus an event where everybody wonders, like, why are we even here? It is shaping up to be more of that, how the winter meetings used to be, of a place where things actually get done and people talk about what they just did.
Yeah, because James, you could talk more about this, because I was hanging out in the hotel lobby when it was in San Diego in the winter of 2019 before COVID. That was a crazy winter meetings because you had Garrett Cole sign, you had Anthony Rendon sign, the White Sox traded Steele Walker for Nomar Mazara. There was one other major signing. Oh, Steven Strasburg. Yeah, it was like each day had a big signing where all I heard were people complaining, like, I just left dinner. Like, I was just at dinner. I sat down at dinner, and damn Boris, this announcement comes in, and now I got to race back to the hotel and cover it. What was that like when you had those big news items covering that at the winter meetings?
I mean, I could tell it was big for other people. Like, I think
the Nomar Mazara trade didn't hit, the blip on the radar.
What's his name? I don't remember. It's Jesse Doherty of the Washington Post. Like, he was sitting right next to me. Like, he had a busy weekend. I could see him working really hard. But for me, I'd be like looking at my phone, like, Jim Bowden says the White Sox are close to a Nomar Mazara trade, and I thought, like, all right, I'm gonna keep walking. I got to get my employee headshot taken with the Athletic. I'm gonna walk along the bay and enjoy my afternoon. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I remember being kind of down on that trade as far as impact and getting some pushback from the White Sox leadership of the time about my lack of enthusiasm. But yeah, that probably, like, the winter meetings, it does bring people together. It does tend to have, like, in terms of comparing the weeks of the off season to other ones, it probably is higher than others for White Sox action. I would say probably the year before, when there was, like, you had to, like, come up with a reason for why to write about Bryce Harper and Manny Machado that day was a bit more active for me. I remember the year before that where they were kind of talking about trading for Machado with a year left, with the idea
the Samardzija,
he would become accustomed to the White Sox culture and see how they do things and want to stay around, which and now represents this kind of harbinger of a trend of trying to find other means to sell Manny Machado on the White Sox than, like, giving him the biggest offer that he got all offseason. So some of those rebuilding winter meetings felt like more was possible in terms of the team transforming than later years when they were ostensibly contending. But it's not Roland Heeman in the decades ago where, like, this is literally a time to do deals because doing it in person is so much more vital now. Like, things can happen, more things tend to happen than otherwise, but it's a lot of media events and things that are kind of built to drum up. It's a lot of song and dance without really, like, the necessarily knowing that the main event is ever really going to show up, like a big acquisition or move that is kind of the meaning for why everyone's here.
Yeah, not everyone stays at the hotel. We're not. I know other reporters are not even the teams themselves. Like, some of the big meetings, like Scott Boras will not be at the hotel. He'll have his own room offsite that teams can escape and meet with him personally.
The big setup goes in, the big budget goes into his meeting, his site where he meets with teams, and then when he comes to the actual winter meetings, they have him standing on a mid-sized box or something less, and we're all, like, crowding around him like human cattle.
It's like an 1876 campaign stop.
Pretty much.
With similar levels of puns, if not even less than what they were doing back then.
23 skidoo.
But yeah, me asking some Noah Schultz question to Scott about 47 minutes into a scrum is the main event for me. We should shoot some montage where I'm like doing sit-ups and reading the one line of question I have like prepared over and over again.
Yeah, with Jeff Passan speculating that Soto could announce where he's signing before the winter meetings, I would push back a little bit on that, Jim, only because having been in part of one Scott Boras scrum, and I think we missed it in Nashville or we weren't close enough to it. I was definitely part of it in San Diego. I was standing right next to James when it happened, and the wall of TV cameras in front of us, and you couldn't hear Scott at all. I just get the sense that he will not miss that opportunity, because when we're in Dallas, when the news comes in that Soto has made his announcement, Boras is going to own the winter meetings. He suddenly becomes more important, bigger than Rob Manfred. So that's why I think they're going to wait until Dallas.
A counter to that is that the news could break before the winter meetings that he signs, and then it could become official during the winter meetings, and they wind up doing the big press conference with Soto there in front of everybody, and you have literally the entire league's media rather than just the however many beat writers the A's have when Soto obviously goes there.
Obviously,
this would be more bigger media footprint to do it at the winter meeting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. So no, that's a good counter, James.
And he could probably pivot to like Alex Bregman and maybe his other clients with Soto out of the way, more oxygen to the undercards.
I do remember a year where Nate Eovaldi's deal became official and he was doing his presser at the winter meetings. But it was this really tall guy in this really fancy burgundy suit walking around waiting for media to kind of swarm him. And they're like, who is that? It's like, oh, it's Eovaldi. It's like, that was weeks ago. Why are we talking about that now? But it was only official then. But it is an opportunity to kind of, plant your flag a little bit if you have stuff go official around that time.
Well, that's a good point, because last year we saw Jackson Churio, right, Jim? He was just walking around with his agents. We were using Google Images because we knew this is obviously a player. This is a free agent. No, this is, I think, 19-year-old Jackson Churio walking through. Makes sense. The Brewers have the Nashville affiliate. It was just a few hours later after we saw him that they announced that huge deal with the Milwaukee Brewers. Yeah.
And that was a case where first I saw him he looks familiar. Looks like I should know him. Then the next time he passed, he's wearing a Churio jersey. That's a case where they're unveiling something and making a big show of it. So, you'll also probably see Jerry Reinsdorf 7 or 12 times, at least if it's Nashville, where it couldn't help but bump into him. He'll probably be there because he likes being there. But yeah, stuff should be happening.
There was one year that Fernando Rondi was just walking through the lobby. Very strong cologne, just kind of a trail behind him.
Did it smell good at least?
It was very powerful.
And you didn't know to ask Keenan Middleton what he was wearing.
Well, we are very excited to cover the winter meetings. And again, any of the big news around Major League Baseball, we'll be covering it. Sox Machine will be there. There's going to be a lot more activity on our social media, especially on Blue Sky. That you can follow us if you're over on Blue Sky. We made it a lot simpler. Jim worked on that. I think it's the verification process in Blue Sky. So we're now just at soxmachine.com on Blue Sky, so you could be able to follow us and find us easier if you decide to migrate over from Twitter over to Blue Sky. We'll have photos, we'll have videos, we'll have interviews with other people around Major League Baseball. Literally picking up everything that I got here in Chicago on the podcast side and bringing with me to Dallas. We have a lot more content coming your guys' way. So hopefully that does get you excited, even if the White Sox don't do a whole lot. Now, that could change because the White Sox do have Garrett Crochet. We'll talk about Crochet in a moment. As we kick off from the White Sox perspective, we're still waiting on confirmation, though, when it comes to the White Sox coaches. This past Sunday, Daryl Van Scout of the Chicago Sun-Times wrote about what could be the White Sox coaching staff. Now, I'm using that phrase in particular because it has not been confirmed and nor announced by the Chicago White Sox. But it sounds like a lot of the coaches from last year that ended the season under interim manager Grady Sizemore could be coming back. So, James, what are you hearing? What's the holdup here as far as making it official? We are expecting this to be official before everyone arrives to Dallas, right?
I definitely putting less confidence in it than I would have before. I think they still want to, but they anticipated it being official before this. And so what the delay is, I don't really know. Like the main things like Thames and Cats coming back are things we've known for weeks. Will Venable talked about his bench coach, which seems like his big addition to the staff, what feels like 2 weeks ago. And it gets always hinted at the idea that a lot of people were coming back. And, the people that Daryl has reported are guys that they kind of brought into someone like a lot of the retention has been guys who came in under Getz last year, like Drew Butera was someone that they wanted to get. Jason Bourgeois is someone they talked up. Like, it's not surprising that the same front office was happy with those hires and wanted those people in place. It doesn't leave a lot of natural avenues for kind of additions for what Venable would be charging for to be made, but it kind of remains to be seen exactly. The staff is expanded last year under Getz, bigger than more roles than they had through much of the Williams and Hans era. It's possible it could expand a bit again to terms of who's really counted as far as the uniform staff. So it shouldn't be that mysterious because I think the major responsibilities have already been kind of hashed out. But I don't know. It's been kind of weird. We were definitely kind of banking on an official coaching staff announcement story earlier this week and didn't get it. But no. Seemingly the big battles were already kind of settled weeks ago, so it's been strange.
And Venable was seen on social media down in Miami visiting Brian Ramos and watching Ramos work out and having those conversations. So he's already started his off-season travel plan visiting who could be key members of the Chicago White Sox roster in 2025. And Jim, if the Sun-Times report is true, because based on what James is reporting, I have multiple questions here, because the first question that I have is, I've always thought the notion was if you hired a manager based on their comfort levels working with other individuals, they would be the ones to select the people on their coaching staff. It sounds like in this situation, like he got a chance to pick his bench coach in Walker McKinven, former defensive or run prevention coordinator of the Milwaukee Brewers, is coming over. But everybody else is coming back from the end of last year. So is it surprising that the front office and Chris Getz is deciding who Venable works with rather than Venable making those choices?
I mean, it's not surprising for the White Sox because they've done this before, where you've had like awkward marriages with people they like and the manager they hire and just trying to make it work. So like maybe not surprising. I would say a little disappointing, just because when you're coming off the losing a season in modern Major League history, it seems like the new manager you bring in should be more of a sea change. Like it doesn't feel like the Will Venable era if only Walker McKinven's there. And he's holding on to Ethan Katz. He's holding on to Marcus Thames. Matt Wise apparently coming back. So not even like an assistant pitching coach coming over to that Venable trust to kind of either share some duties or inform about the kind of information they liked in Texas or at other stops. Maybe we'll see that with the hitting coach. I think that's maybe one area where you could see some evolution. Ryan Fuller hired above him. And so like Marcus Thames, like being there and being somebody who can be a trusted conduit for messaging that Fuller wants to install. Like, I can kind of get that, but like, we'll see what kind of, like, if there's assisting hitting coach that like Fuller approves of and Venable approves of, and they're all on board and they feel like the information flow is going to be better. Like, I guess that's different enough, but overall it does feel a little bit disappointing, and it feels like the people that gets brought in, like, haven't proven their worth. They were not good defensively. They were not good in terms of game planning. They were not good in terms of just kind of thinking through things. And some of that reflects in the coaching staff. Not all of that is coaching staff. A lot of that's talent, and just talent being stretched beyond, what they're able to do reliably. But still, like, it feels like, given the profound nature of the failure last year, it feels like bringing in Venable and then like having like one Venable guy, assuming McKinven's a Venable guy. Like, we don't even know because he hasn't been able to talk about him.
That's
like,
a good point.
Montoya was somebody who was like a compromise candidate between Grifol and Hahn, or maybe Hahn said, we want Montoya, and Grifol's like, okay, yeah, if it gets me the job, sure. I'll go with that. But because they haven't talked about it, we don't know the order of, who proposed him and, whose idea it was. So like, yeah, it's very awkward. And, if it is a case where Venable and a whole bunch of White Sox holdovers are who you're running with, it still feels very much like last year's White Sox with a new guy talking every day, which is an improvement, based on, going from Grifol to Venable, who seems like a little bit, better at the talking thing. But it's still, I think, largely disappointing in terms of symbolic value for just how much should be changing.
Is my assumption just off base now, James, in today's modern baseball? Like, my assumption that it's the manager that picks the coaches and the staff, not the front office?
Yeah, a little, in the sense that, like, when you have your pitching director and your hitting director, it becomes a bit more of an operation of making sure someone who fits into that, general plan than, hey, I've worked with Dave Duncan forever and we're a package deal. Like, I don't think you see those sort of pairings anymore. Okay. And you see like, something like the way like Matt Hook being re-signed by the Brewers got covered as like, this like almost like a free agent re-signing sort of thing. Like, that's something that functioned, or Jeremy Hefner with the Mets. Like, that's something that's kind of, those have been gets for those roles, for those organizations that have gone beyond like changing the manager, and go beyond just like that manager and pitching coach kind of pairing. So I think that flattens or narrows a little bit where the manager is really expected to have a lot of influence. So you don't really expect him to have the top say on who heads the hitting operation, who heads the pitching operation. And it limits it to maybe those, the bench coach and those base coaches, and or maybe some other smaller roles that he thinks are really important. It's just that we're already kind of seeing the one, like there's not like a really, Walter McKinven's not being hired over from Texas or anything like that. And with knowing that they're already keeping the base coaches on hand, guys who have obviously the organization is really high on, that kind of dictates how they're kind of running that. You're not seeing like where, like, I think a question we have for when we do talk to Will Venable about this is like, do you feel like you've put your stamp on this staff? And some of it is that modern baseball doesn't just have that sort of like absolute command for the manager anymore. It's just not how you orient your pitching and hitting operations, or maybe even your fielding coordinating at this level anymore. But it does raise the question of like, all right, well, who is his guy? Like, even just talking to Venable's compatriots or people he worked with, is that he was that extension in the clubhouse for Bruce Bochy. So who's going to be that guy who kind of can be an extension of him and communicating for players or extending his bandwidth of his message? I'm sure he can work well with these guys. I don't think that, they resent Will Venable or something like that, and they're not going to follow through his ideas. But is that sort of presence for him on this coaching staff where he has an extension of himself, or is that something he has to develop in spring training, in that rapport with everyone else? There's kind of a lot to be hashed out at a point where most other teams have made this announcement already. And that's kind of the deal whenever you don't speak publicly or don't make things officials. It just gives time for speculation and questioning to pop up.
Yeah, because I'm assuming Brian Bannister and Ethan Katz, they have a great working relationship, James, based on what you were able to decipher from your conversations with both last year.
Yeah, I mean, they work together with the Giants. Ethan described him as like his go-to guy to talk about anything pitching, and Ethan could probably rattle off some moments where he helped Bannister, in the past too. Ethan Katz was the guy who thought Gregory Santos should throw a sinker, not a four-seamer. So it's amusing that he came over from the Giants and clicked under Katz after not working when Bannister was still there. But
and then Bannister came over and
Bannister got his revenge and traded him a third time. So yeah, they're pretty close, and I think even talking with front office people after Grifol was fired, they were kind of talking at Thames and saying like, yeah, our offense stinks under any traditional metric. Like we'd fire the hitting coach, but we've been firing hitting coaches pretty regularly year to year now, and it hasn't been going. It hasn't been a cure-all to just clear house, because Thames was 3 in 3 years at that point. And if this is a guy we think the players trust and communicate, we're doing more to head infrastructure. What's the point if we're already adding a head director of hitting, for example, of firing a hitting coach for the sake of firing a hitting coach, especially for a team that like this is not like the Yankees and we lost in the playoffs and we need to do something. This is a team that's very much still rebuilding. I think fans could make a compelling argument of like we're the worst team ever, fire everybody. But yeah, I feel like the view of the front office was very like, I don't want to say last year was not important, but last year was kind of like, see, we've been telling you we gotta do a lot of stuff, and so they don't necessarily view their hires as stained with something that really speaks to how bad things were able to get with the last group.
I think something I'm going to be paying attention to and putting a pin, Jim, is that relationship between Ryan Fuller and Marcus Thames, because this is a mountain that they are climbing out together. And how do we make one of the worst offenses since the DH has been introduced to the American League and Major League Baseball? How do we make this better? Justin Jersley has worked with a lot of these young guys in the clubhouse throughout the minor leagues. And Grady Sizemore is going to be sticking around, but we still don't know what role. So as James put it astutely, we can speculate because it hasn't been officially announced by the White Sox, even though we think we know who's all coming back for the coaching staff. But it is odd. A team that loses 121 games, hires a new manager, and the only coaching change is a new bench coach. That's odd.
I hope we get crazier titles at least.
Like run prevention coordinator. What could instead of base coaches, what would you name them?
Artists. Base running choreographer.
There you go, choreographers. Love it.
Drinkster.
And I'm still waiting to see what Grady Sizemore, what his title will be for the White Sox. But again, once we do get this news, when the White Sox do make it official, we'll have the reporting on SoxMachine.com.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Future you faces some big expectations. Work out more, go to bed earlier, and most importantly, make smart money decisions. Thankfully, today you has Bank of America. One place with tools and guidance to help balance tasks from budgeting to saving. So you can just be you with big plans. Do more with a bank that asks, what would you like the power to do? Explore our tips and more at bankofamerica.com/future you.
By far, for the White Sox, though, the headliner coming into the winter meetings is, will Garrett Crochet be traded? Now, last year, when we previewed the winter meetings, Jim and I were really confident. Like, we were 95% sure Dylan Cease was going to get traded in last year's winter meetings. And we were way off. He wouldn't be traded for a couple more months into spring training when he finally got dealt to San Diego. The big news for the White Sox last year was the signing of Eric Fetty, which surprised us and required us to look up his highlights in the KBO. But for the White Sox, it's very clear. Again, they have another headliner of a pitcher that they're trying to trade in Garrett Crochet. James, what's the latest gossip here? If you're hearing anything, is there any type of movement on the Crochet front, or are we just stuck in a holding pattern until like the big names like Corbin Burns and Max Fried finally sign?
I don't think so. They're talking a lot. It's clearly from just reading other reports, they're talking a lot more about than just the scenarios I'm hearing about. But yeah, like we went through this with Cease, so I can't equate like a lot of chatter and a lot of like teams, exploring like what they can do or what their options are, as meaning that something imminent is going to happen. They could still hold them till spring training. They're at least posturing like they're not afraid of doing that. And certainly the way the Cease thing played out means that they shouldn't necessarily live in fear of that. But everyone thinks that this is clearly like peak value to trade this dude. Like one, like he could theoretically go out, lead the league in innings, win the ERA title next year. All right, maybe that's too extreme, but he could have a very good season next year and maybe not be as valuable for 1 year of control as he is for 2 years right now, especially when this year is going to be probably $3 million or less salary. And that only spiked in the light of seeing Frankie Montas get 2 years at 17 per after not a good season. Matthew Boyd get 2 at 14 and a half after a pretty good fifth of a season. As a scout put to me, like, what would you rather pay 31-year-old Frankie Montas $17 million or give up a couple prospects for Crochet? They know which one they pick, and that might be a good route to go, even if you didn't think Crochet was significantly better than Frankie Montas, which I'd argue he probably is. So I think the stars are very aligned for him being traded. Something, whether it happens now, I think they've proven to be kind of fickle on that. As far as, I mean, this is basically their one big move to make this offseason. I don't think they're going to get what makes sense for Luis Robert, especially knowing that like you're a team that can absorb a bad Luis Robert season. Like you should not tamp down your price to get rid of him when part of the benefit of having a rebuilding roster is you can kind of take these shots on guys who are unreliable, high ceilings, but that could spike into the trade value. I don't know. Just like if we could make the case for like, hey, with a new hitting director, Andrew Vaughn's kind of a nice bounce back shot. Luis Robert's like 5 times as good of a bounce back like guy for the White Sox. It makes too much sense for them to hold on him. So I think Crochet is kind of the real big chance to make a big infusion this offseason. They know this kind of peak value. Something that's been pointed out to me with some of the scenarios I've heard is that 2 things. I think we can look at like contenders and kind of drop ones off based on like, well, do they really have the farm system to get it done? Do they have like the top tier prospects you'd want for Crochet, especially position side? Something to keep in mind is that, and something I've heard that they've at least discussed is another three-way trade to get a contender involved that maybe doesn't have all of the strength and the freshness on their own to kind of make it work. And in line with that, or possibly, coordinated with that, is that Crochet made his interest in an extension, very apparent at the last deadline. So the potential teams that could be a home from him, and especially teams that maybe don't have the straight up two-team trade capital in terms of prospects to make it happen, is that you should look for a team that could be a good home for him or good candidate to extend him. Maybe a team that has a very well documented history of extending guys and keeping them in house for a long term, better than others. That could be a possibility to consider with him as well. So I think it's Sean Morosi floated like the Cubs because they're just a straight great farm system that you could very easily look at some of their top level hitters and think like you could build out a package straight up between them and the White Sox for Crochet. But I don't think it's as narrow as that because of the three-team possibility. And I think you should very much think about, would this team be interested in, and can they extend Garrett Crochet when you're weighing what his potential landing spots are?
Well, that piques my interest, Jim. It's fascinating. Three-team trades are always fascinating. The last three-team trade clearly worked for the Chicago White Sox.
I'm also hard to confirm, so please don't actually do that, White
Sox. Obviously we're talking about what transpired at the trade deadline last year with the Dodgers and Cardinals. I thought the Cardinals stole that trade. They robbed the White Sox and the Dodgers, and I ended up being very wrong. It was the Dodgers that knew exactly what they were doing, orchestrating that three-team trade, got exactly who they wanted, and now they get to keep them, and they have a World Series ring to show for it. And now we're hoping that Miguel Vargas adds some muscle in the offseason and it could be a viable hitter. And then, of course, the Cardinals are waiting to see if Eric Fetty can bounce back to his first half self of the 2024 season. What do you make of the idea of maybe a three-team trade? 'Cause I had not thought of that, Jim. I've been looking around trying to find the best one-to-one matchups as far as teams and prospects. And I get the Cubs' point of view. Jim Callis and I had that conversation as well before heading out on vacation, or during when I was in vacation. The Cubs we thought was the second best landing option after the Dodgers, but then the Dodgers signed Blake Snell, so I don't know how interested they are. So yeah, I guess let's get weird. It's not as straightforward as we thought it was after the season ended.
Yeah, the thought of a three-team deal, like the way the Cardinals and Dodgers worked over the White Sox, made me think like, Jed Hoyer saying like, hey, let's help me shove Chris Getz into a locker. Like that's kind of what I had the thought of. Just even day of the trade, I thought, wow, that's really light. And after the deadline had passed, you saw reporters talking to GMs and saying like, yeah, we always preferred getting everybody's prospects in one deal, or everybody's, key players in one deal versus like selling them separately and getting more for the return. So it was a disappointing return at the deadline. And so I hear three-team and think like, I don't necessarily like that, but it could be a case of actually building up the package and not relying on one team's resources where it makes sense. The Cubs thing was interesting just because, one, you have the kind of reflexive thing of, oh, great, the team across town gets to enjoy, Garrett Crochet under meaningful ball games, which the White Sox didn't get to do. And so you could live vicariously through that if you didn't have like, natural aversion to Cubs doing well. But because there is that, it makes it tougher. But I also thought like, hey, James can drop in at Wrigley Field every once in a while and just like have a conversation with Garrett Crochet when the White Sox are on the road. And, we can get some good material out of that, because I'm all for the White Sox extending Crochet just because of the posts James is able to get out of idle conversations with him and didn't want that to stop. So I'm kind of for the Cubs getting into it just for that purpose. But yeah,
for selfish reasons.
I still think like the Red Sox remain prominent as a team that could do it by themselves because they have like 4 top 100 prospects and all 4 could headline a deal, and that makes a certain amount of sense. But yeah, once you get past them, and if you consider the Dodgers' interest maybe more muted because they don't need him the way that, the way Snell kind of fits the exact thing they'd be seeking with Crochet, except, far more proven. Then yeah, you could see another team's resources getting involved. I would just hope that the White Sox would actually, use those teams' resources, not just, trade exclusively from one team to get their, get a player who has no options next year, and then a guy who had a broken leg and, only one prospect is actually functioning as he should have been.
Because as James pointed out, the signings that we've seen so far, so Aroldis Chapman, Jim mentioned Boston, he signs a 1-year deal, more than $10 million. We are assuming to be the new closer of the Boston Red Sox. There's a lot of speculation that the Boston Red Sox could be targeting former Atlanta Braves starting pitcher Max Fried. Now I say former, he could obviously come back and re-sign with the Atlanta Braves, but it sounds like Boston is interested in Max Fried. The Red Sox are trying to prove to their fan base that they're serious about spending money again. So let's actually see what happens this offseason with the Boston Red Sox, but quite a bit of rumors on that front. But as James mentioned, the two recent starting pitching contracts, I am very pro player, but this is where it will drive me crazy as a general manager. If Frankie Montas gets 2 years, $34 million, and Matthew Boyd's getting 2 years, $29 million, damn, we should be, if I was a general manager, we have to be spending more draft capital on starting pitchers. We got to develop starting pitchers because this is where payroll budgets just balloon and they explode in a real hurry. And for the Mets, money doesn't seem like to be a factor. For the Cubs, it does. And as James mentioned with Montas last year made 30 starts. So if the Mets are looking for someone to be dependable to take the ball every fifth day, okay, I could see that being attractive. According to Baseball Reference, Montas was worth 0.6 WAR. And he hasn't been good since being traded from the Oakland A's in 2022. Like not even league average, below league average starter. So below league average starters getting 17 mil in the next 2 years. And then Matthew Boyd hasn't pitched more than 100 innings since 2019. And since the COVID season of 2020, Boyd has been worth 1.8 WAR, according to Baseball Reference. And since 2020, he has only appeared in 35 games. So, gentlemen, I want to pitch this idea to you because there's always been this kind of analysis when it comes to contracts and especially the annual value. Like when Juan Soto signs his annual value, and let's say he signs for like 15 years, $40 million a season. And people go out and say, oh, that's a huge overspend. Well, all you're hoping for Juan Soto is to be worth 5 WAR. If he can break past 5 WAR, oh man, we're in the surplus value because the league, maybe they still use this, consider $8 million is the price to get 1 WAR out of a player. But on the starting pitching front, James, I'll start with you. It seems to be really inflated. Like teams have to spend more cash in free agency to get 1 WAR out of a starting pitcher than spending that cash in the position player front. Am I way off base here in that type of thinking?
No, I wonder if like these sort of spikes kind of get baked into how we value pitchers, or how we kind of even, or should be baked into how we even calculate the WAR for them. And certainly it could be offset by the number of guys who spike and have big years while having signed non-roster deals or, smaller 1-year deals later on in the offseason. And the people whose potential are seemingly above this threshold of just like average, where they, 3 WAR season is potentially possible for them, get, see this kind of significant bump up from like the rest of the market share, and it averages out. But yeah, I think, at least from what talking to people around the game and certainly talking to people about Crochet's trade value, I think the idea that we're at least currently in a big spike where the price of starting pitching seems very inflated is something that's very present right now. I do think there's probably a level of the way that teams are valuing pitching, or whether it's how much it's about what their model says about what they should be able to do going forward, or the quality of their pitches, or the grades of their pitches, or the grades of their command, and how it projects in their system, probably has a lot more to do with their valuation than, us looking at their stat line from the previous season. I still think workload and surface level results definitely serves the spike value pretty often, but I think we're seeing some signings that maybe seem a little off to us because they're a lot more driven about internal data than maybe we really have access to at this point. So I'm sure what the Cubs model, especially given that they were a team publicized for going away from traditional scouting to being a lot more model driven, I'm sure there's data that they have that projects Matthew Boyd to provide surplus value for them, even on a deal that seems, nutty to us based on his health track record and really a performance record that doesn't show many years where he was really consistently at this above average level. Maybe simply separated from his abusive career relationship with Tim Anderson allows him to thrive in a way that's currently, not reflected in his career track record. So it does seem weird. It does seem like it's spiking right now. It does seem like it should work to advantage of the White Sox when they're trying to trade Garrett Crochet, or maybe he'll even, given the way he finished down the stretch and the way, Ken Rosenthal reported teams talking about him, maybe it's going to result in a bigger Michael Soroka contract than any of us really anticipated.
Not me.
At least in terms of,
I said Soroka might get the dumb contract, or the one where everybody says like Michael Soroka signed for that. That was like my one prediction that might actually come true this winter. Yeah, yeah, because that was what I was going off of, and what I was thinking was like, the Braves maybe set a model with like, well, if we don't want to pay retail price for Frankie Montas, maybe we'll pay what seems like excessive price for 3 years and $30 million for Reynaldo Lopez, and then make a starter out of him who's worth way more than that because we feel like we can stretch him back out. So like that's one move. The one thing that like I had trouble like squaring up was like, no matter how hard it is to find like starting pitchers, like Dylan Cease's market was still pretty quiet last year. And like the return was like, okay. But nobody was like fired up about what the White Sox got back, no matter his durability. And like, perhaps with the way he did not impress in October, maybe that's just what the teams who were interested in him were just thinking like, maybe he just, he's got a really impressive slider. He is as durable as anybody, but when it comes to like games against really good lineups, they can wear him out or they can run him down, and he's not going to provide the payoff at the end of the season that, maybe we're looking for. So maybe that's why Drew Thorpe and a few other prospects is the best that the White Sox can get for him.
Yeah, just moving forward, like as long as Jerry Reinsdorf continues owning the Chicago White Sox, the White Sox giving Matthew Boyd 2 years, $29 million, have a lot of people up in arms, being like, we spent our entire offseason budget on Matthew Boyd. That might end up being the case for the Cubs. Like, it's a weird situation on the north side. If Jed Hoyer only has $50 million to add to the player payroll this offseason, well, he just gave $14.5 to Matthew Boyd, which again, who hasn't pitched more than 100 innings since 2019. Like, I get the models and I get the analytics part, the money and years being agreed. This isn't a small risk. Maybe for the Mets it is because it's Steve Cohen and whatever cash just rains from the sky over Queens with the New York Mets. But this is still a risk for the Chicago Cubs. And yeah, they're going to need 1.8 WAR seasons for Montas and Boyd to break even on these deals. And maybe I look like an idiot come July, and both Montas and Boyd exceed that. And the analytic departments for the Mets and Cubs nailed it right on the head. They saw something that nobody else did, and this was a good investment. But starting pitching is getting very expensive out there. And again, as long as Jerry Reinsdorf continues owning the Chicago White Sox, this is not an area like the White Sox have ever been big spenders on. They don't commit the type of years to bring in like a Blake Snell or Corbin Burns. So yeah, even if the White Sox do trade Garrett Crochet, good thing they have Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, because they're going to need to develop those frontline starters if the Frankie Montases and the Matt Boyds are getting $14+ million a season to be back in starting pitchers. The other interesting thing that's going to be coming up for the winter meetings, of course, is the Hall of Fame vote. And this is the first day activity. We'll get to hear who will be inducted into the Hall of Fame through the various committees on Sunday. And there's some White Sox references, Jim, and none bigger, especially for our older crowd when it comes to Dick Allen. And we've talked about his candidacy prior episodes of past seasons on this podcast. We both feel like he should be in the Hall of Fame already. How has he not been? So another attempt here for Dick Allen. Using your gut feeling, Jim, does Dick Allen get the necessary votes and finally makes the Hall of Fame?
It's hard to say, I'm positive, but it does seem like the committee has to do something, not only with Allen, just because he's not owed the Hall of Fame. He's earned the Hall of Fame, I think, especially as people have grown more aware of just, when he was currently going, when he was going through the voting process with the writers and such, he had a contentious relationship with the writers, and especially in certain markets, Philadelphia being chief among them, where just he was surly and unapproachable, misunderstood, they didn't take any attempt to understand him. They prescribed their view upon him, and he did not respond well to that, and they just butted heads. And Allen was more or less checked out from the whole public relations part, and he produced, and then that wasn't enough for gaining Hall of Fame favor. But I think as time has advanced and people realize he really got a raw deal in terms of what he was expected to deal with in Philadelphia. I think people have respected the player more and sound like the talent really should have been appreciated more at that time. And he's come up one vote short the last two times. And I think when you have a ballot like this, there's a matter of he should be a Hall of Famer, but also they got to get some guys into the Hall. They can't keep crowding the committees with interesting, compelling cases, because then you just never get the necessary votes unless they change the way voting is done to where they do allow bigger ballots to allow more votes. Right now, you have to try to get the same committee to agree on 4 of the same people with their 4 ballot spots. And that gets tricky when you have individual favorites, which is why Allen has come up one vote short the last 2 years. But it would seem they tried to, I think, reconstitute these committees to better account for guys who get stuck that they feel like they should be in. So I would be surprised if for a third straight time, Allen comes up one vote short. So that's why I think he's going to get in. But you can never quite be sure. The fact that, it's a shame that he's not around to see it. I thought maybe last year he would get in because, it's tragic, but it's a case where a lot of times they do recognize their mistake too late. And, whether it's Ron Santo, Minnie Minoso, et cetera, where they just, it's always the year after or the chance after they died where they get in. And I thought Allen might get in 2022. That didn't happen, but, perhaps this time around would be the case.
Yeah, Dick Allen's not the only one with White Sox connections. Ken Boyer is also on the ballot, better known as winning the National League Most Valuable Player Award with the St. Louis Cardinals back in 1964. Tommy John is also on the ballot. Of course, probably
traded for Dick Allen.
More well known for his elbow surgery that we still reference today. And there's also John Donaldson. So before we were recording, James, you were filling me in. I don't know a lot about John Donaldson, but he had a great impact on Major League Baseball.
Join the club. So John Donaldson was, he's a two-way player, but he was, a famed Negro League star, and a lot of it before, some of these traditional records that we do have of the Negro Leagues. Which is why when they made the stats official from the Negro Leagues, he was not really much of a beneficiary of it. They didn't really count anything before 1920, which is when Donaldson was already 29. And so much of his career was spent barnstorming or touring and playing these exhibition games or these showcases, going to different towns, and just it being the attraction to come see John Donaldson, not Josh Donaldson. That'd be horrible. Pitch and delight the crowd and kind of kind of integrate that town, and so to speak, that had previously not entertained black baseball. So little of those games are really a part of, he's got like 22 appearances that they have on record for Baseball Reference of him pitching for the Kansas City Monarchs. So much of his playing contributions was not in that format of just like, the National Negro League. So I spent this today interviewing Peter Gordon of the Donaldson Network, which is a site that he kind of runs, kind of a forum, kind of a project of just researching and trying to find historical records or old newspaper articles documenting Donaldson's accomplishments. So in his work, he's confirmed, he can't confirm the quality of the competition he's playing every time, but he's confirmed over 400 games that Donaldson won as a pitcher, over 5,000 strikeouts, various absurd accomplishments like 30 straight no-hit innings, or he found like this old letter Donaldson wrote home. It's like, yeah, I pitched 18 innings, struck out 31, and stuff like that. That of this legendary playing career that was very renowned, that was written about in the newspapers at the time, like, hey, yeah, the greatest pitchers ever is coming to town to, pitch in Bemidji, if you want to go check it out. But it's not something that's caught in the historical record, or the real reclassification of those statistics didn't make him like suddenly, it's just one step by step with Cy Young or anything. It's a lot of kind of appreciating or delving into his place in history. And so his connection to the White Sox is that he was hired as a scout for the White Sox, and there were signing black talent a little bit during that time, but you weren't seeing black scouts raised to this official status where Donaldson's presence in White Sox organizational meetings is being written about in newspapers. He's kind of the first person to really hold this kind of prominent role, first black person for a major league organization. And the epitaph on his headstone, which is something he didn't have as recently 20 years ago, he's in an unmarked grave in Burr Oak. And the White Sox and Jerry Reinsdorf helped pay for him to have a headstone. It says a man before his time, and that's really fitting for him because so much of his accomplishments were before they're really getting documented in a way where he can get easily recognized as being like, oh, this is clearly the statistically most dominant pitcher of his age. So much of his scouting work is him being like, hey, we should really be scouting all these black high schools. There's a really lot of talent there, and that not really catching on, even if it becomes obviously a way that teams become really successful when integration is a lot more accepted in the talent pool. He tried to get the White Sox to sign teenage Willie Mays. It didn't quite take. They were happy with Dave Philly, which don't get Peter Gordon going on that at all. He signs Sam Hairston, the kind of the patriarch of the now famous Hairston family, where you have Jerry Hairston, Jerry Hairston Jr., Scott Hairston, all playing in the majors. He's the first Black American player who plays for the White Sox. He gets 7 at bats. He's largely just like, I don't think it was actually quote unquote AAA, but he's a figure of a guy who just dominates. He's the Jordan Danks, the souped up Jordan Dank, where he's just dominating AAA for the longest time because they're not giving him a shot because they kind of have a kind of de facto quota on how many black players they're going to really have. And he's a legend in that town. I think they bought him like a new Cadillac to write off him after he set like a hit record. But just so much of John Donaldson's work is just him doing these efforts to integrate the game before it's really taking. And I think everyone kind of intellectually understands like there was so many efforts to integrate the game before Jackie Robinson, but it's hard to really appreciate those guys who don't really have that clear success. And this is someone who's really important to the history of sport, important to the history of the White Sox, even if kind of the easy, concrete accomplishments that get somebody inducted to the Hall of Fame aren't there. So he got 50% the last go around in 2021. Maybe, with the increased attention there's been on the Negro Leagues, this is the year where there's a groundswell, and the historians who are arguing this case have a lot more stuff to point to, thanks to the Donaldson Network. But people who have been kind of arguing on his behalf are really accustomed to the idea of like, we're not going to get recognition from the Hall of Fame. Like, that's not going to be, how he gets valued, and it's incumbent upon us to really state what is important without the help of MLB or the Hall of Fame, which has been slow to recognize Negro Leaguers. So it's not all or nothing for him to make the Hall of Fame, because he's obviously important whether or not the Hall of Fame recognizes him or not. But it's interesting every time he comes up to see, like, is this something that baseball really has an interest in continuing to dive into the history, because it's not just 3 or 4 famous Negro Leaguers that we need to recognize, and then we say, like, all right, good job, we righted that wrong, and go home. There's a lot of guys who are fighting for this for many, many years, and he was one of them, even if he didn't get to be around to be the guy who's on the front of the newspaper when these battles get won.
No, that's great stuff, James. I had no clue, and now I do, and I'm rooting for him to make it, and to be curious to see on how things shake up on Sunday. I'm with you, Jim. They got to get guys into the Hall of Fame. I'm a big Hall of Fame guy, but, you even have guys like, I'm surprised Steve Garvey is not in the Hall of Fame for how successful that he was in the 70s and 80s. And Dave Parker is not in the Hall of Fame. And Louis Tiant, who unfortunately just recently passed away, great Boston Red Sox pitcher.
Keith Hernandez is another one of just somebody whose defensive ability is, was appreciated in terms of awards, but just, actual value that accompanies hitting stats that weren't necessarily like eye-popping for a first baseman, but the total package of player was really tough to replicate. If I had the ability to travel back in time, I'd love to visit these baseball writers in the 80s that voted for the Hall of Fame and be like, you guys are idiots. Trying to compare to everyone, to Babe Ruth or Joe DiMaggio or Mickey Mantle or Hank Aaron. You guys are idiots. You've created so many problems.
Tiant didn't have a White Sox connection per se, but as a fellow Cuban, I remember when Jerry Reinsdorf was hosting these kind of media events to try to drum up publicity for Manny Minoso's Hall of Fame candidacy while he was still alive. Tiant was a part of that and advocating for him, along with Tony Perez. So not a White Sox per se, but always someone I was associated as kind of part of the larger effort to recognize the importance of these early Black Cuban players and how important they were to, integrating the sport and getting people appreciation for the talent that was present from that place.
We'll see who gets voted on Sunday. That'll be one of the first big news items of the winter meetings, unless Juan Soto signs and they make that announcement on Sunday. That will grab all the headlines, but we'll be reporting that. And I know, again, there's a lot of listeners and a lot of readers on SoxMachine.com that grew up, especially with the 1972 White Sox. And Dick Allen has a special place in your heart. Saved the White Sox, maybe kept them in Chicago with how well that he played before they were going to maybe move to Milwaukee. I'm rooting for, I want everybody to make it to the Hall of Fame. That's just how I feel. Like, I think everyone's got great as far as resumes to make the Hall of Fame, but I think at most 4 will make it, Jim. Is that how this works? Yeah, it's very difficult just in terms of like getting everything lined up perfectly. Like if you get 2 in based on the math, like that's pretty good. 3 is achievable. 4 requires like ultimate cooperation. Got it.
Bordering on collusion.
Again, we'll find out on Sunday. Collusion. Exactly. Yeah, collusion. The other things, too, that we'll be covering as we wrap up this episode, the MLB Draft Lottery will also be occurring during the winter meetings. Yes, the White Sox will not have the number 1 pick in the upcoming Major League Baseball draft. The best they can do is 10th overall. I say best because it can get worse depending on how the lottery shakes out, but they've got the best chances of earning the 10th overall pick. The Colorado Rockies and Miami Marlins have the best chances of earning the number 1 pick. They both have 22.4% odds of earning the number 1 pick. That's key because if the Rockies do get the number 1 pick, if they win the draft lottery, you can go to the house. You can bet your house Ethan Holiday is going to be taken number 1 overall. Matt Holliday's son, former Colorado Rocky. Great, as he is the right now, people are talking that he's the best prospect available in the upcoming MLB draft. Rob Manfred will have his State of the Union type of address of Major League Baseball that we'll now get to participate in and grab some highlights, including his golden rule proposal. Jim, I'm expecting someone to ask about this rule idea of when it's a once a game high leverage situation. You could have anyone bat. So think like with 2 outs at the bottom of the ninth inning, if you're down a run with a runner on first base, the hypothetical is the Dodgers could call back Ohtani. And I've been joking. I don't even know who the White Sox would call up. Maybe Brooks Baldwin if he's on a heater to bat one more time instead of somebody else. But I'm sure someone will ask about the rule proposal. How do you feel about that, Jim?
I don't like it, but I kind of like it. Like it's.
Oh no, Jim! Why?
It's fascinating. Like it does get the wheels turning in your head. Like I like it for that reason. Like it's. At first, it's the equivalent of the meme of the woman tasting I forget what it was, kombucha or something like that, making like a whole bunch of faces.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and like that's kind of how I weigh it, and ultimately come down to like, it feels like really just gamifying it. But in terms of like, say, if you have this rule in effect when you're trying to sign Juan Soto, like a lot more teams can justify signing Juan Soto. Like that's why I think the value comes in terms of like actually making your team better, trying to sign that one great player. Obviously that makes it that player's price rise up, but it does motivate. You often hear like, oh, one player can't make a difference to this team. Like, well, maybe he can, or maybe he can make more of one. Where like there are a few tumblers that need to click into place because you're able to sign this one guy who can maybe affect your leverage outcomes in a way that you wouldn't expect him to for when he's just like waiting 1 out of 9 turns. So also I think, just the way the nature of the game goes is a lot of times closers in the ninth inning do face like 6, 7, 8 in the order versus 3, 4, 5, just the way like sequences go. And when you go 9 innings, like your chances are facing the bottom of the order a lot more likely than facing the middle of the order. So I think like that's a case of it does address that natural weakness, if you call it a weakness, to make the end of games as exciting as possible. So that's why I think like it's not entirely out of place, but it does feel like cheap and unearned. And like it's a hard thing to put back in the. I guess they could undo the rule, but I think it feels like it would be irreversible. And then like, what do you do if it just like, it just feels cheap and doesn't have the kind of change you want? Like that's kind of where I think like they really have to do all of the math here to make sure that they're not just creating this case where like, oh, the Dodgers can add just one more great hitter. And now like you do get that Premier League type thing of just, the top payrolls can really swing games more in their favor.
And then finally, the Rule 5 draft will be happening on the final day. It'll be on Wednesday. And James, the White Sox do have the number 1 pick in the Rule 5 draft. So that could be a little interesting if they want to find someone that they can maybe sneak onto their 26-man roster. How likely is that, James, that the White Sox do actually make a selection in the Rule 5 draft?
I think very likely. They got their pick. They have an open 40-man spot. The demonstrated cost of just literally what they've done the last 2 years of just taking someone to camp, maybe an arm they think likes, and hoping it pops, I think is negligible. I don't think like we're really. It seems like that's what you should be doing at this point in an organization. You're trying to find upside surprises the way as Bannister talks about. This seems like another shot at just you don't even have to commit to, like, really to them being on the roster. I mean, you do and don't, like, you have to return them at some point, but if it really hits, that kind of takes care of itself. They've brought guys in the camp for the sake of bringing them in the camp. The last 2 years, Nick Avila didn't stick. Shane Droyan got hurt. It seems like I don't know why they'd be. I really can't see them not picking someone. Actually, I'd be stunned. I'd be very much like, what are you even doing? Sort of reaction to it. So like whether or not their Rule 5 pick will be like someone who actually sticks on the roster, like that's something that's a way more toss up, or we'll have an idea like in late March whether that's someone who really has a candidate to that. For them just adding another person who could hopefully turn into serviceable for very little investment, that's like 150% what they should be doing. And what clearer example would there be than being the first overall pick in the Rule 5 draft? Like, I realize that they're remaking their scouting process, but if you can't find anybody Rule 5 available, remake it again. I don't know. So I think they'll fix them.
I like that Nick Avila, like the White Sox couldn't sneak him through, like the Giants cleaned him back. He goes 14-0 with the Giants in AAA after returning, and then doesn't make the majors that year. Like, incredible, like, outlier year. 56 games, wins 14 of them, no losses. And like the Giants, like, yeah, he's not a September call-up. Like, just unsatisfying in all regards of just, White Sox thinking they're onto something, but never quite knowing because he doesn't actually get there. And then he does get at least one chance at the Giants next year and post an ERA near 9. So that's usually how it goes.
Yeah, I'm looking right now in Baseball America because nobody loves the Rule 5 draft more than Baseball America's J.J. Cooper, and I usually lean on him for coming up with the list. I'm just going to be looking through guys that maybe the White Sox can add to the bullpen in the Rule 5 draft, Jim. Hey, who throws 100 miles an hour that's available in the Rule 5 draft? Let's take that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like more of those players are being protected because there tend to be, I think, waves of, or like trends in who gets protected because of who teams might claim. Like the White Sox, I think, got pressured into protecting Michael Rodolfo a year early because the Padres went on a big spree of trying to like get, A-ball hitters on a roster in a rebuilding year the entire year, and didn't quite work out. So I think you're seeing teams realize, well, usually like the relief path is one of the easiest way to hide a guy. And also just, one weird trick can allow a reliever to go from posting a 9 ERA in AAA to being a mid-leverage arm on a reliable basis in the majors. So it based on what I was reading about players who are protected, it does seem like the most live arms are ones that are protected. Now it's more a matter of like, which guy has a pitch that we can bring out, which guy just started throwing a slider more than ever before, and we can maybe get him throwing it 55% of the time, and that'll be his ticket to throwing 50 major league innings in 2025. I think that's probably more the math than somebody who throws 98 and has no idea where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, part of the pertinent discussion is whether the White Sox are going to lose some of those guys in the Rule 5 draft with not protecting Trey Mago, who's not a live arm. He throws low 90s, but has really good AAA numbers, and maybe you can buy into the slider or other AAA performers like Addison Coffey, or didn't perform as well, but Anthony Hoopy Tuinatoa is obviously pretty advanced. Someone who was at risk of being taken in the Rule 5 last year, so they might have traffic going in and out. Maybe that gives them several roster spaces. Maybe they'll pick 5 guys in the Rule 5 draft. Maybe they'll keep it going for extra rounds as everybody else groans in the room as they keep picking Rule 5 guys.
We have flights to catch in this. Oh, that'd be great. Well, again, that will be happening Wednesday morning on the final day of the winter meetings. When the White Sox take someone in the Rule 5 draft, we'll be covering that again on Sox Machine. So there'll be some activity while we are in Dallas, some news that we'll be covering, and hopefully there'll be more breaking news. We get resolution of what's going on with Garrett Crochet. Maybe, just maybe, Chris Getz surprises us again like he did last year with the signing of Eric Fetty, as the White Sox still have multiple holes in their roster that they have to address, even though they are still very much in selling mode. They still have to build a roster to at least start opening day of 2025. So they're still on the search for maybe some starting pitching help, maybe some help in the catching area, maybe some more outfielders after Austin Slater. We'll see what they do in the winter meetings. But hopefully, I'm hopeful. I think it'll be a lot more active than last year's winter meetings, which, Jim, was at times very quiet in Nashville. I don't think that's going to be the case in Dallas this year.
Yeah, at least we got to meet some people who we hadn't actually met in person after years of meeting them online. So it's always good for like that part of it, but that's harder to pass along to readers in terms of conveying value to them. Like, hey, it was great meeting Dan Szymborski after hearing on the podcast 5 billion times. And, that's great for us. Maybe not so much for people who don't get to hear him on the podcast because he's doing his own stuff at the winter meetings.
Yeah, and since I'm bringing the equipment, maybe we could steal some of those people and record segments with them for the daily podcast during the winter meetings. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. The next ones that you guys will be getting from us will be from Dallas, Texas, as we are there at the winter meetings covering all the happenings. All three of us have been credentialed by Major League Baseball, so really looking forward to that. And again, all the news that will be happening around Major League Baseball and the Chicago White Sox will have for you guys either in podcast form, video form, on social media, and of course, as always, on SoxMachine.com. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. You can subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. The Spotify Unwraps were just released today. Thank you so much for everyone that shared how often that you listen to us, and we made your top 5 podcasts in 2024. Thank you for enduring that historical season and that pain with us. We greatly appreciate you guys. You can also listen and watch the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. And of course, you can follow us on social media on all the platforms at Sox Machine. Of course, on Blue Sky, again, we made it simple. You can just follow us at SoxMachine.com. On Blue Sky, you can follow James and I. You can follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. If you enjoy our work and you want full access to our coverage of the Chicago White Sox, and a great time to do so as we're in the winter meetings, and thank you so much to our Patreon supporters for allowing this to happen for us, all three of us, to be in Dallas, Texas. You can sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Monthly plans start at $5. And the Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.